Hello and welcome to another episode of Analog Insights. In today's episode, we review the Zenza Bronica SQ-A, which is a modular 6x6 single lens reflex medium format camera from the 1980s. It is often referred to as a poor man's Hasselblad because it offers very similar features, but comes at a much lower price point. My friend Jules and I drove out to the so-called Wolfsschlucht, which is about an hour away from my home, in order to shoot some black and white film with this camera, some Ilford Delta 100 and one roll of slightly expired Agfa slide film. In addition to that, I used the camera recently during a portrait session shooting the 50mm wide-angle lens, and I will share some of these images here as well. So let's take a closer look at this camera and the images that we've taken with it. The Zenza Bronica SQ-A was introduced in January 1982 and produced until December 1991. It is a modular system camera, which means that you have all sorts of accessories and elements that you can attach to or detach from it. So most importantly, you have interchangeable leaf shutter lenses, you have different focusing screens, waist level and prism finders, different film bags, and of course an optional grip. The camera supports 120, 220 and even Polaroid film via a dedicated back. And if you want to do that, you can even attach a digital back to it, either a Hasselblad or Phase 1. They are supported via an adapter plate, but of course we're here to shoot film and we can disregard that. The SQ in the name refers to square, or stands for square, referring to the 6x6 centimeters medium format image ratio. And you should know that that Bronica also had an ETR series, so a camera series running the 6x4.5 centimeter medium format image ratio. So if you're more interested in that, take a closer look at the ETR cameras. Otherwise, stay here for the 6x6 square format. So what about the features of this camera? When you use the waist level viewfinder, it's basically a completely manual exposure camera. Only once you attach the so-called AE prism finder, and AE stands for automatic exposure here, you have an aperture priority automatic exposure mode using that prism finder. And that's also the most important differentiator between the SQ-A, which supports this prism finder, and the earlier SQ middle model that did not. The camera runs with a 6-volt silver oxide battery and has a built-in battery tester, which is really convenient. And it is recommended to use the so-called 4SR44 battery, but the alkaline alternatives work as well. The only thing that should not be used is a lithium-based battery for this particular model. The shutter speed dial is on the left of the camera and ranges from 8 seconds, which is marked here in yellow, all the way up to 1/500th of a second. And overall, the style also feels really nice. And since you have leaf shutters, Seiko leaf shutters built into the lenses, which are electronically controlled via pins in the lens mount, this information is here transferred from the body to the lens, of course. As you have leaf shutters, it also means that it flash syncs across the entire spectrum of shutter speeds. And speaking of flash, the camera does not feature a TTL metering. That was an advanced feature that came with a later model, and I will talk about that in a minute. but here you don't have TTL metering, and it's actually a bit inconvenient to attach a flash to this camera because you don't have a hot shoe by default. You only have it with the optional grip, so you would need an additional flash bracket in order to use it and attach it to it. But here is the connector at the front for the flash. At the back of the body is a film speed dial that ranges from ISO 25 all the way up to 3200, so a really nice range that covers most needs basically. And it's by default, as explained, it's just a nice reminder of which film you put in there, because only once you attach the AU prism finder, this information is actually used in order to set the correct exposure in the aperture priority mode. On the right side of the camera there are two different switches. There's one for mirror lockup, where you can choose between just for one exposure or the continuous mirror lockup. And there's a somewhat tricky dial that is causing some misunderstanding, apparently. At least that's what I read in reviews. And I can see the point, and that's the multi-exposure setting with no indication at all on the camera, and it has two different settings. One is to the right, where you can see the red a red dot, and that means, okay, I'm transporting the film, so this means forward or horizontal transport when you crank, and then there is the vertical setting, which means I'm staying in the same place and not transporting the film, which results in multi-exposure. And once you know that, it makes perfect sense, but a slight indication would have helped, or otherwise you just have to take a look at the manual in order to make sure that you operate the camera correctly. The Zenza Bronica SQ-A stands in a long tradition of 6x6 medium format cameras produced by Zenza Bronica. And researching the camera online, I realized that this history of this particular camera manufacturer is really, really interesting. So Zenza Bronica as a camera manufacturer was founded in June 1956. But by that time, the Latinized name of the company was already popular among Japanese and was known as a luxury brand for personal accessories. So nicely handcrafted and designed cigarette lighters, cosmetics, compacts, and watches, for instance. And the name Zenza Bronica goes back to its founder, Zenzaburo Yoshino. And already as a young man, he was fascinated and really interested in the mechanics, in the innovation, and also the craftsmanship of camera manufacturers cameras by Leica, Contax, and Rollei. And driven by that fascination on the one side, but also the frustration on the other hand, that there appeared to be no camera out there that is living up to his expectations and that combines all the features that he needs. He felt like most cameras are a trade-off between another type. He set out to create a high precision single lens reflex modular system medium format camera. And of course that was quite some undertaking, and it took him several years and a really long journey. And that's the interesting part here, because he started out driven by his fascination for these luxury cameras to set up a small camera store in Tokyo's Kanda district for these kinds of luxury cameras. And that became quite popular both among Japanese and also among US Army soldiers who were stationed in Japan after World War II. And he used then the revenue and money that he made through that store to found his first company, the Shinkodo Works, in 1947, that produced the personal accessories mentioned before. And he used then that company and the revenue he had made through these luxury goods to direct the research and development department in 1952 to create a medium format camera. And 8 prototypes and 200 million yen later, they were finally able to produce and to release the first Bronica Z camera, as it was called, at the Philadelphia Camera Show in March 1959, to huge success. And that was the first release, the Bronica Z, and was soon afterwards replaced by the Bronica D standing for Deluxe, so they were really playing that luxury brand game. And the press really said it's the response, the Japanese response to the Swedish Hasselblad, and really lived up to the expectations quality-wise that people were expecting. And already back then, it was a modular system 6x6 medium format camera. And that's exactly the kind of tradition that the Zenza Bronica SQ-A that we're looking at here today is kind of connected to. And I felt a need to share that beautiful story of Zenzaburo Yoshino and his little camera store that enabled him to create eventually the kind of camera that he wanted to create. So what about the handling and what are our personal impressions? Both Jules and I were really surprised by the solid feel and overall handling of this camera. The focusing screen is really bright and fun to use. The magnifier for fine focusing works great, and I personally really like using that. The only downside is a bit the weight, because with the standard 80mm lens and the waist level finder attached, it already weighs 1.5 kilograms, so it's a little bit hefty. What is potentially a bit confusing if you're just starting out shooting film and this is one of your first medium format cameras is the electronic and mechanical interlocks running through the camera body that protect users from attaching or detaching elements in the wrong order. So sometimes it can be confusing if you can do something that you would expect to be able to do and the camera is taking care that you're not doing it in that particular moment in time because, for instance, the shutter is not cocked right now. And that can be really helpful, but at the same time it can be confusing if you're just starting out and don't know what to do. What I also really like is the shutter noise. It's a bit loud, so it's not really a quiet camera, but what makes the noise here is of course mostly the mirror flipping up, but you can still hear that quiet, nice leaf shutter sound in there as well, and that I always really appreciate. I love leaf shutters for the sound and the quiet, nice sound they make. The camera overall, in my opinion, is ideal for those interested in a 6x6 single lens reflex modular camera system, but who don't want to put down the amount of money that you would need to acquire a Hasselblad. The lens quality, and we will talk more about that in a minute, is great as well. Overall, you can really say the Zenza Bronica SQ is a nice alternative to a Hasselblad. And in contrast to the alternatives like a twin lens reflex camera, like a Rolleiflex or a Yashica Matte, it's a completely different design. And that's important to note here that the Zenza Bronica is really one of the only alternatives to the Hasselblad, because in this case Mamiya did never produce a camera system like it. The Mamiya 6 is a rangefinder camera, and then there are the Mamiya C330, for instance, and that's more of a twin lens reflex camera again. So there's no alternative from the Mamiya side, and it's basically going for Hasselblad if you want to shoot 6x6 with a single lens reflex modular system, or going to that Zenza Bronica Square. A small downside, and that's really a little one, but I thought it's important to mention, is that there is no place on the camera to put your dark slide when you remove it. So you basically need to put it in your jacket or somewhere else, as Jules did here, because there's no space for it. There are 5 different versions of the Bronica SQ. The first model was introduced in 1980 and is very similar to the SQ-A that we're looking at here, but it comes without mirror lockup and an automatic exposure capability. Then the SQ-A, as said before, was a small refinement of the earlier model, coming with 10 gold contacts instead of 6 for the viewfinder and enabling the automatic exposure prism finder that I've mentioned in the beginning to work in the first place. Then you have the mirror lockup lever, and you have slight modifications on the dark slide and the film backs. Apart from that, it works with all the accessories that were there before for the SQ as well. Then the SQ-AM was released, which stands for motorized. So this was a camera that does not come with a manual crank, but with a auto winder, a motorized winder. And that's also the only way it works, basically. And in order to drive that, you need 6 AA batteries, and you're good to go. Then the SQ-AI is probably the most advanced version of all the cameras, and also the most sought after one. This is the one that comes with a TDL flash metering and a motor wind back if you want it, so you can basically decide whether you want to have a motor wind functionality or use the manual crank instead. This was also the one that is most popular and was built up until 2003, so it's possible to get one that is relatively new. And then as a counterpart to that, there was the SQ-B, which stands for basic, and this was the version basically produced to cater to the demands of professional studio photographers who were not interested in any kind of automatic exposure functionality or TDL flash metering, but instead just wanted to use a handheld light meter and to do the thing. So this basic version was also produced until 2003, and is kind of the tip if you are into manual exposure anyways and you're not going for the AE prism finder and not interested in that. It's kind of a tip to go for the SQ-B instead, because they are relatively late models, so rather new ones, and it tends to be less expensive because of the lesser functionality. So the AI is the one that most people look for, and the SQ-B might be a little tip here. So what about the lenses for this camera system? Here we have to differentiate between two different series, the Zenzanon-S and the Zenzanon-PS. The S series was first introduced together with the SQ in 1980s, and these lenses are considered to be alright, but some apparently had some issues with coating. Some, like the 50mm, had strong vignetting, and apparently some of the lenses even had problems with light leaks. And that's also why it's recommended to use the later version, which was released in 1986 and is called the Zenzanon-PS. And the story behind it here is that in 1983, Zenza Bronica moved to a new production facility where they had the latest lens testing and lens assembly equipment, and decided to redesign the entire series of Zenzanon lenses. And that resulted in that new Zenzanon-PS series. They have 100% multi-coating and apparently are better, according to many sources, than the original ones. So if you get a chance to decide, I would recommend to go for the later PS series. It's a really impressive lens system that ranges from 35mm f3.5 wide-angle lens all the way up to a 500mm f8 telephoto lens. And it also covers the apparently really nice 100mm f4 macro lens. The standard 80mm lens, the f2.8 that it comes with, that it usually comes with, is really nice. The only downside is that the minimum focusing distance is 0.8 meters. That could be better, but apparently that problem is also solved by getting the 100mm macro lens, because here you have a close focusing distance of 0.66 meters, and thanks to the different focal length you get pretty close, fairly close to your subject. My set here consists of a mixture of the newer PS lenses, the 50mm f3.5 PS, the 80mm f2.8 PS, and then the older version of the 150mm f3.5 lenses. Overall, Jules and I were really impressed by the sharpness of these lenses and by the overall quality. So yes, it does not live up to a cult-size Hasselblad lens, but yet this is a really nice set of lenses, and there's not much to complain about, to be honest. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode and this review of the Zenza Bronica SQ-A. To put it in a nutshell, it's a great alternative to the Hasselblad. If you're in the market for a 6x6 single lens reflex modular camera system but are not willing to put down the money for a Hasselblad, this is definitely a good alternative. You have a great selection of really sharp and nice lenses. You have all sorts of accessories for it. And if you want to have an automatic exposure mode, you can even go for the AE prism finder and attach that to it. So here I would recommend looking at the SQ-A or SQ-AI with the AE prism finder, or if you are interested in the manual exposure mode anyways, take a closer look at the SQ-B and a late model at that. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please remember to like this video and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules, Greg and I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you soon. Bye.